She made a list of my flaws, thinking I'd fight to stay, but when she read the one word I left behind, she finally understood what losing me really meant. When Emma told me she wanted to make a pros and cons list about our relationship, I laughed at first. I thought she was joking, the kind of playful thing couples say after an argument. But she wasn't smiling. She had that quiet, businesslike tone she used when she wanted to sound emotionally mature. She even grabbed her favorite journal, the one with the pressed flowers on the cover, and a pen. "Can you give me a little space?" she asked. "I just need to think clearly." I nodded. "Take your time." And I meant it. Because, deep down, I knew that if someone needed to write a list to decide if you're worth keeping, they probably already had their answer. So while she sat at the kitchen table, scribbling in that floral journal like a corporate HR manager doing a performance review, I quietly went to our bedroom. And I made my own list. It wasn't long. It wasn't neat. It wasn't even written on paper. Just one word in my notes app. Enough. I put my phone down and felt something shift inside me. A kind of calm, quiet certainty I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. After an hour, Emma called out, "You can come back in now." She looked at me like she expected gratitude, like I'd been waiting for her verdict. "I've thought about everything," she said, straightening her paper. "There are a lot of positives, but also some serious negatives we need to work on." "Like what?" I asked gently. She sighed, her pen tapping the table. "You don't compliment me enough. You don't help me emotionally the way I help you. Sometimes, I feel like I'm the only one trying." I nodded slowly. "Okay. Anything else?" She hesitated. "You've changed. You used to be more fun, more spontaneous. Now you're just comfortable." "Comfortable," I echoed, smiling a little. "That's a con." "I just think," she continued, her voice growing sharp, "you could be trying harder to make me feel like you still care." I looked at her list, 2 neat columns, every word underlined. It wasn't a relationship check-in. It was a scorecard, and I was already losing. When she finished explaining every bullet point, she folded the paper and said, "I'm glad we can be honest with each other." "Yeah," I said softly. "Honest." Then I stood up. "I think I'll make my own list," I said. "Good idea," she replied brightly, oblivious. "It might help you see where we can both improve." I smiled at that. "Already done." She looked surprised. "Oh, that was quick." "Yeah," I said, walking to the door. It only had one word. When she asked me what it was, I didn't answer. I just left the room, grabbed my jacket, and went for a walk. That night, while she was asleep, I wrote her a note and placed it on the kitchen table beside her pros and cons list. Then I packed a small bag. The note simply said, "I loved you enough to stay. Now I love myself enough to leave." When Emma woke up the next morning, I was already gone. No slammed doors. No shouting. No last words. Just silence. And a folded note next to her perfectly written pros and cons list. She must have thought it was one of my usual apologies. I used to be predictable like that, quick to fix things, quick to smooth things over, always afraid to lose her. But that version of me had ended the moment she started grading our relationship like an essay. I was sitting in a small diner 2 blocks away, drinking burnt coffee and watching the early sunlight creep across the street. My phone buzzed once, then twice, then 12 times in a row. "Emma, where are you?" "Emma, did you take the car?" "Emma, what is this note supposed to mean?" "Emma, are you serious right now?" I didn't respond. By the time I paid my bill, she had already switched from confusion to panic. The kind of panic people feel not because they lost someone, but because they realized they took that someone for granted. When I went back later that afternoon to pick up the rest of my things, she was sitting on the couch, the note in her lap, staring at it like it was written in a language she couldn't understand. "You're really leaving?" she asked. Her voice was small, a tone I hadn't heard in years. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think we both know it's time." She tried to laugh it off at first, as if I was overreacting. "It was just a list, Ryan. Everyone does that in therapy. It's healthy." "Healthy," I repeated. "Writing a list to decide if I'm worth your time?" Her eyes flickered. "It wasn't about that." "Then what was it about?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "I just wanted to be sure I wasn't settling." There it was. The truth, small, sharp, and clean like glass. I nodded slowly. "And now you are." She stood up, crossing her arms. "So that's it. You're just going to walk away?" "I already did," I said, and turned toward the door. That's when her tone changed. "You'll regret this," she said coldly. You're throwing away everything we built. I paused for a second, hand on the doorknob. Emma, you made a list about whether I was worth keeping. I made a choice about whether you were worth chasing. And I left. That night, I checked into a small apartment across town. Bare walls, one lamp, no TV, but it felt lighter than our entire house had in months. For the first time, there wasn't someone measuring my effort, my tone, my energy. There wasn't anyone comparing me to who I used to be. Just quiet. Real, peaceful quiet. Days passed. Then a week. She tried everything. Apologies. Voice messages filled with tears. Promises to start over. A photo of her holding the note, captioned, "I didn't realize what I had until I lost it." I didn't reply, because the truth was, she hadn't lost me. She'd lost the version of me that tolerated being someone's project instead of their partner. And once that version was gone, there was no bringing him back. 2 months later, I ran into her best friend, Claire, at a coffee shop. She looked awkward but curious. "Emma's been off lately," she said. "She's been telling everyone you overreacted." I smiled. She's allowed to think that. Claire hesitated, then asked, "Do you miss her?" I stirred my coffee. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But mostly, I miss who I thought she was." Claire nodded quietly. "She told me she still has that note." "Yeah," I said, standing up. "It's the one thing I hope she actually reads." That night, I took a walk by the river, the same spot where Emma and I used to go on weekends. The same spot where she once said she wanted a love that felt like freedom. I finally understood what she meant. Freedom wasn't running away from someone. It was finally walking toward yourself. And as the city lights rippled across the water, I realized, for the first time in a long time, that I wasn't angry or bitter or even heartbroken. I was free. Update 1.it had been 6 months. 6 calm, quiet, unbelievably peaceful months. Work was going great. I had started a small consulting business with 2 colleagues, and for the first time in years, I wasn't dragging myself home exhausted to an argument waiting behind the door. I cooked dinner for myself, read before bed, and reconnected with my brother, the one Emma had always claimed was a bad influence. I hadn't heard from her in months. Her number was blocked, her social media muted. Occasionally, a mutual friend would mention her name, but I'd just smile and change the subject. Until one Thursday evening, I heard a knock on my apartment door. It was her. Emma looked smaller, not physically, but in presence. The same confidence that used to fill every room she walked into had evaporated. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled into a messy bun, and her hands were trembling slightly as she held a brown envelope. "Hey," she said softly. I didn't move from the doorway. "Hey, can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. "Sure." She walked in like someone visiting a museum of her past, scanning everything, trying to piece together how I'd lived without her. The apartment was simple, but warm. Books on the coffee table, a photo of me and my brother fishing, a half-finished puzzle. She noticed the absence immediately. No pictures of her. No reminders. After a long silence, she said, "You look good." "Thanks," I said. "So do you." She nodded awkwardly. I brought something. She placed the brown envelope on the table. Inside was the infamous pros and cons list, the one she'd written about me, the one I left behind. Except now, there was another page attached, handwritten, slightly smudged. It was titled, "The Things I Never Noticed About Him." I skimmed it silently. Every line was an admission. He always listened even when I made him feel small. He never yelled. He loved me without needing to prove it. He deserved better. When I looked up, her eyes were wet. "I know I can't undo what I did," she said quietly. But I had to say it out loud. "You didn't deserve that version of me." For a moment, I almost felt the urge to comfort her, the old instinct kicking in. But I stopped myself, because this wasn't my burden anymore. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that, Emma." She stepped closer. "I'm not asking to get back together. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry. And that I miss you." I took a deep breath. "You miss what you had control over. Not me." Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. I continued. "You made lists because you wanted safety. You wanted to measure something you didn't understand. But love isn't an equation, Emma. It's a choice, and you chose doubt." Tears fell silently down her cheeks. "I know. I hope you find peace," I said finally. She wiped her eyes and gave a small, broken smile. "I think you already did." She left the envelope on the table and walked out quietly, closing the door behind her. That night, I opened the envelope again, not to relive anything, but to make sure I'd closed it all properly. The paper smelled faintly like her perfume, and as I read her new list, I realized something. It wasn't for me. It was for her. A confession, a step toward accountability. So I took a pen, added one last line at the bottom, and wrote, "Thank you for finally seeing me, even if it's too late." Then I slid it back into the envelope and placed it in my desk drawer. Not to keep, just to rest. Because for the first time since that night she made her list, I no longer needed closure. 3 weeks later, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hey, this is Emma. Just wanted you to know I started therapy. I'm working on the parts of me that made me hurt you. Thank you for walking away when you did." I smiled faintly and deleted the message. Not out of anger, but because some stories don't need a sequel. Final update that it's been a year since that knock on my door. A year since Emma stood there trembling with a letter full of regret and a heart full of what-ifs. If you told me back then that I'd ever think of her with anything other than bitterness, I would have laughed. But time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. I don't think of her every day anymore. But sometimes, when I'm sipping coffee on my balcony, the morning light will hit just right, and I'll remember the night she made that list. The quiet scratching of her pen, the strange calm that came over me when I saw it. The moment I realized love shouldn't have to be evaluated. A few months after her visit, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was her father. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ryan, son, I just wanted to thank you for how you handled things. Emma told us everything. We didn't realize how much she pushed you away." I was quiet for a moment. "It's all in the past, sir." He sighed. "She's doing better. She found a job in a new city. Started volunteering. She talks about you sometimes, always with respect." "That's good to hear," I said softly. Before hanging up, he added, "For what it's worth, I'm proud of how you turned out after all that." When the call ended, I just sat there for a while. It hit me then. Growth doesn't always need witnesses. Sometimes the people who broke you are also the ones who force you to rebuild stronger. Fast forward to now. Life's been good. Not perfect, but peaceful. My consulting firm took off. We landed a big contract this year, a digital marketing deal for a major hospitality chain. Ironically, when I scanned the client list, I noticed something that made me pause. One of the new marketing leads was Emma Thompson. My chest tightened for a second, then relaxed. Different city, same field. Of course our paths might cross again someday. But instead of dread, I just smiled. When the meeting invite came, I accepted. The day of the meeting. The conference room was bright and modern, full of chatter and coffee cups. When she walked in, she froze for just a heartbeat. I could tell she wasn't expecting me to be sitting at the head of the table. "Ryan," she said, stunned. "Emma," I replied calmly. "It's been a while." She gave a small, nervous laugh. "You look great." "So do you," I said, and gestured to the empty chair. "Please, have a seat." As the meeting went on, I noticed how composed she'd become. Polite, professional. She took notes, offered clear ideas, and didn't once interrupt. She was different. When the meeting wrapped, she lingered behind while the rest of the team filed out. "Ryan," she said quietly, "I wasn't expecting to see you here. You really built something incredible." "Thanks," I said, gathering my papers. "You seem to be doing well too." She hesitated, then said, "Can I tell you something?" "Sure." "I found your list." I frowned slightly. "My list?" She smiled sadly. "The one you left behind. The one that said just one word. Enough." I didn't understand it then, but I do now. There was a long pause between us. Not uncomfortable, but heavy with understanding. She took a breath. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say you were right. You were enough. I just wasn't ready to see it." I looked at her for a moment, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman who hurt me. I saw someone trying, really trying, to grow. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than you know." She nodded, smiled faintly, and walked away. That night, I sat at my desk, the same one where I'd written that single word years ago. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and a pen. This time, I made another list. Not of pros and cons, not of regrets or revenge, but of gratitude. I learned to set boundaries. I learned silence can speak louder than shouting. I learned that self-respect isn't pride, it's peace. I learned that letting go doesn't mean losing. I learned I was enough all along. At the bottom, I wrote one final line. Sometimes, closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from acceptance. I folded the paper neatly and tucked it into a notebook labeled Chapter 2. A few months later, I met someone new. Her name's Maya, thoughtful, steady, and a little shy. The first time I told her that I loved to write lists, she laughed and said, "Then make me one someday." I smiled and said, "I will." But not to compare, to remember. And that's how it felt, like remembering what love is supposed to be. Not an equation, not a test, just peace.